I'm Michelle Easton, president of the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women. We're so glad to have you all here, especially the C-SPAN audience. I founded the Clare Boothe Luce Center over 30 years ago. Our mission was to prepare and promote conservative women leaders. Our primary focus is young women in college, you see them on the pictures around the wall, as well as promoting our best women leaders, like today's speaker, women who are role models for students. This event, CWN, has been held monthly for 23 years now. We gather to hear conservative women leaders discuss critical issues and talk over lunch. We've had some great leaders over the years, Senator Marsha Blackburn, Lila Rose, Molly Hemingway, and today, Amanda Collins to speak at CWN. I'm very happy to introduce her. She'll be talking about the importance of the Second Amendment, especially for women, and her book titled Beyond Survival. Amanda's been a Luce Center speaker for many years, and she speaks on college campuses, at women's events, and law enforcement conferences across the nation, advocating for Second Amendment rights. Her book, Beyond Survival, Reclaiming My Life After I Survived Rape, details her experience of a brutal assault on her college campus, a campus that was a gun-free zone. One of the Luce Center sponsored speeches that I heard her give was at a Texas college that was in the midst of a debate about whether to allow students to carry firearms. Amanda had been trained by her family to use firearms for hunting and for protection, but she wasn't allowed to carry it on her campus out there in Nevada. It could have stopped her assault. Think about these so-called gun-free zones at schools and other places. If you were a criminal wanting to commit a violent crime, wouldn't gun-free zones be the place to go to commit a crime where you knew people couldn't defend themselves? I've been president of the center now for 30 years. Soon I'm going to shift from president to chairman. And all of these years, we've been speaking out against these nonsensical, pitiful arguments from the left about how more gun-free zones, more gun control will decrease crime, while at the same time we've all been watching a horrible increase in crimes. Have you been to D.C. lately? Washington, D.C. makes it very difficult for citizens to get a license to carry firearms. How's that working for D.C.? As crime skyrockets and criminals, not law-abiding citizens, have the guns in D.C. Think about it. If some crazy person were to walk in this room right now, determined to mow down our audience, what's the one thing we could do to stop him? Well, we could call the police, but it's not likely they'd get here in time. What would be the one thing to stop him? One of you in the audience who carries a firearm would stop the crazy shooter. More law-abiding citizens need to learn how to use firearms and to carry them. In fact, one of our regular activities here at the Luce Center is to take our young women students to the firearms range, and we have some pictures over in the hall there by the kitchen, to learn about firearm safety and use. Staff and students. Amanda, by telling her story and writing this book, has been a great help in the ongoing discussion about the Second Amendment, the constitutional provision that gives American citizens the right to carry firearms. We have some of her books available afterwards for purchase, and she will be signing them following her talk if you'd like. She shares her story to encourage other women, she says, to live a full life after trauma so women can choose how they want to defend themselves. She's had a lot of appearances in the media, on Fox and Friends, The Glenn Beck Show. She's been on radio and podcasts and many publications. She received a bachelor's degree from the University of Nevada, Reno, in education and English. That's why she's such a good writer. She lives in Florida with her husband and her 3 daughters, who she homeschools. What does she like to do in her spare time? Well, she loves being with her family, mentoring young women, leading Bible studies, and she's a runner. Following today's talk and question and answer, please have some lunch with us right outside the room and join us for the book signing. Now, please join me in welcoming Amanda Collins Johnson.
Put my daughter down right now. What the hell are you doing? I don't know you. Put her down. She doesn't know you. About 9 years ago, in a play area at a mall, a middle-aged man who was clearly there with no one, but was carrying a small child's sweater, reached over the half wall and picked up my 22-year-old baby girl, my 22-month-old baby girl. I was 8.5 months pregnant with our third daughter and helping our oldest balance on a play structure in the middle. I yanked her down and I screamed as loud as I could with the intent to get as much attention on myself as I waddled over to my baby girl, who was then dangling with her feet as the man who had grabbed her froze in shock at my discontent and at my non-complacent display. That day, like most days as a stay-at-home mom, I was first in line for not only my safety, but my daughter's safety, my children's safety. I was fortunate that day because I left with my baby girl in my arms and he walked out with an empty child's sweater. The police were called, and I was informed that because he had left the premises and no crime had been committed, nothing could be done. Ironically, that particular Saturday, my husband was not with us because he was taking a self-defense and home defense firearms course. Men are hardwired to be the defenders and protectors of our home, and I really do believe that that should be encouraged and fostered. In the same breath, we can't forget that women are often by ourselves and alone with our children. And for that reason, we need the choice to be able to choose how we're going to participate in our own self-defense, because in our day-to-day civilian lives, we are first in line for our defense. I've had the honor to be invited here to speak with you today, and thank you so much for that warm welcome, Michelle. I'm here to speak to you about the importance of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is a foundational component to American democracy, balancing the individual liberties with the need for public safety and security. The Second Amendment is first and foremost a safeguard against tyranny. It serves as a check against government overreach, as an armed populace can resist an oppressive regime. Once during a radio show, the host asked me, just name one country that has overthrown the government by being armed. And I laughed because I thought that she was being sarcastic. And then I quickly realized she was legitimately asking me, and I said, the one we're sitting in. Not only in 1776, but a second time during the War of 1812. So what does this have to do with my daughter being almost stolen in front of me? The Second Amendment also enshrines the right of individuals to keep and bear arms, ensuring that citizens have the means to defend themselves, their families, and their property. It's an honor for me to be here today to speak in this capacity with you about the importance of the Second Amendment, because the reality is I'm no expert. I'm not. All I have to offer you humbly is my experience and my journey. That day at the mall, I had my concealed carry on me. I was fortunate enough to not have to use it. Guns are offensive to people because oftentimes people who find them offensive see them as only extremely violent and an act of violence. I can't call myself peaceful if I'm not also capable of great violence. If I'm not capable of great violence, I'm not peaceful. I'm harmless. As the first in line to my self-defense and the defense of my children, I want the choice to be peaceful. My relationship with firearms started at the tender age of 3, and it's one of my earliest memories growing up. I was ready for bed. I had on my daddy shirt, and I ran downstairs to my daddy's workshop and to tell him to come tuck me in. And I saw him cleaning a firearm, and I was curious. So he picked me up and he set me on his workbench, and he continued to clean his firearm as he told me very plainly and very clearly what it was and what it was used for. He let me know it wasn't a toy, and he let me know that no firearm is a toy and that they all need to be used as though they are always loaded. He let me know what each part of the rifle was and explained it to me, and thus began the ongoing conversation in my household that fostered a very healthy respect of firearms and understanding the responsibility that entails gun ownership for both my family, that also trickled down to my sister and myself. I started target practicing under the guidance of my dad when I was 6, and I shot competitively in high school. My senior year, we placed 3rd in state. The right to bear arms has deep roots in American history and culture, reflecting principles of self-reliance, independence, and liberty. The historical and cultural significance of these principles has not been lost on my family, though it didn't always translate to firearms. When I was 5, I was informed by my mom that I needed to get my 2nd-degree black belt to get my driver's license when I turned 16. I was 9 when I realized that that rule applied only to the Collins household and not the society as a whole. By the time I went off to college, I knew my value as a human being, and I knew my life was worth protecting. As the first in line for my self-defense, even with the 10 years of martial arts training I had, I knew that the harsh reality is as a woman, a firearm is the most powerful equalizing factor when met against an opponent much larger than me. For my 22nd birthday, I asked my dad to pay for my concealed carry class because I wanted to be self-reliant and independent participant in my self-defense. I did everything I could to ensure that I would be an unmatched victim should the occasion ever rise. However, Nevada legislators had decided to draw an arbitrary line around the university campus and declared them a gun-free zone. So as a law-abiding citizen, whenever I stepped onto that campus, I was defenseless. The very act that was meant to ensure my safety had an unintended consequence of making me harmless. And it affected the whole community eventually. On October 22nd, 2007, it was a typical Monday evening. The only thing different for me was the midterm that was waiting for me. And when we left class at 10 p.m., I left with a group of students like I always did, because it had been ingrained in me that there's safety in numbers. As we left, we talked about the midterm like most college students would, talked about what answers we had for the questions, whether or not we thought we did well. I was fairly confident. And as we approached the parking garage that I had parked in, I didn't see anything between myself and my vehicle. And so I wished the group a good night, told them I'd see them the following week, and I made my way to my vehicle as they went upstairs to theirs. Shortly after that, on my way to my vehicle, what I realized is that what I had not seen was a man that was hutched behind the wheel well of a truck in a sedan. He grabbed me from behind, forced me to the asphalt, placed a pistol to my temple, clicked off the safety, told me not to say anything, and then he proceeded to brutally rape me. As the first in line to my defense, I was rendered harmless. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the university police cruisers parked. And at the same time, I knew that the university office had closed at 6 p.m. and no one was coming to save me. I could see in my attacker's eyes that he had the propensity to kill. And with my life hanging with the thread of a trigger pull, I braced myself to meet my creator and wondered how it was going to be for my family to find me like that. If I'm being honest with you today, that night I was really hoping I was on my way to meeting Jesus, because actually living after surviving this horrid crime seemed impossible. It just took me about a minute and a half to describe my attack to you. And in that time, one person in our country has been raped. Every 90 seconds, someone in our country is raped. My attack lasted 8 minutes. My least favorite cliche: what doesn't kill you? Wrong. What didn't kill me left me wishing I was dead. Because what good is surviving if you're not really living? The terror I felt in the moments during my attack continued to haunt me for the next 13 months while my attacker remained at large. In November of 2008, he was finally captured by the Reno police, and he would eventually be tried and convicted for not only raping me at gunpoint in a gun-free zone, but also for kidnapping and raping his second victim, and raping and murdering his last known victim. Discontent is the first step towards progress. As constitutionally minded citizens, we have an obligation to this country to use the voice that's been given to us to protect our Second Amendment rights through education, critical thinking, and constructive discourse. Because the power of willful ignorance can never be overstated. To be honest, before my attack, I never really thought twice about having to leave my firearm at home. I was young, invincible. It bothered me that I was seemingly trustworthy across the street at the sandwich shop. But as soon as I crossed the road, I was suddenly incapable of making sound decision with a firearm. But I'm a rule follower, and so believing I didn't have a bone in this fight, so to speak, I also believe that nothing to this magnitude would ever happen to me because I was smart and I was aware of my surroundings, and I would never let anyone take advantage of me. I was wrong on both ends. As a human being, we always have the right to stand up for our lives, our dignity, and our bodies are worth protecting, regardless if you have a story like mine or not. All safeguards I took were not a guarantee. It was simply risk mitigation. My children, my home, and I am worth protecting and keeping safe. And if my safety cannot be guaranteed by a third party, then I ought to be able to choose how I want to protect myself. It's human nature when we hear stories like this to always brush it off. Oh, that poor girl. Until that poor girl becomes you, your sister, a friend, or another loved one who's left trying to piece their life back together. The woman I was before entering that parking garage was not the same woman driving out that night. And there's no way around the fact that this was a defining moment in my life. But I had to make a choice. on how it was going to define me. My prayer eventually became and continues to be, let me not die while I'm still alive. When tragedy occurs in our lives, we have a choice. We can give into the void and emptiness that fills our hearts, our lungs, and constricts our ability to breathe. Or we can find meaning. It's okay to exist in the void for a bit. It's natural. I certainly did. And it's important to grieve what's been taken. And there's going to be future moments for me that are going to be spent in the void of grief. But when I'm able, I choose life and meaning. What about you? In all my time of sharing my story, I have learned that everyone has a story. We've all faced trauma. Trauma is trauma. And I've seen it time and again as image bearers of our Creator. We have what it takes within us to live a full life after. But it doesn't happen by choice. It has to be pursued relentlessly. It's been anything but easy. And over time, I have gotten stronger during my journey of reclaiming my life. I've learned that I needed 4 key elements on a daily basis. First, I need my backbone. That's the core of what holds me up. It's the center of everything. And for me, that's my relationship with Jesus. What about you? What's your backbone? Second, I need my rib cage. It's my community. It protects and guards my vital organs and my heart and breathes life back into me and loves life back into me and speaks truth when I need it. I have found my rib cage by trial and error, and I have learned that these people need to be chosen with wisdom in my life. But it's been critical. If you're brought into someone's rib cage, I want to encourage you to hold that space for them because it is an honor and a privilege. And if you don't know what to say, it is perfectly acceptable to show up and shut up. Don't underestimate the power of your presence to just sit in the uncomfortable with someone. Who's in your rib cage? And more importantly, whose rib cage are you actively participating in now? Third, I need my funny bone. It's probably been the hardest one for me to develop as I've had to learn to laugh again. I'm not saying I laugh at what happened to me, but when moments present themselves, I take advantage of them and I find joys in my life. What brings you joy? Last, I had to find my wishbone. I had to change my thinking from why me to what now. My wishbone is what has brought me here today. And it's developed 3 points over time. The first one was to challenge the notion that gun-free zones are safe zones. The second was to educate society about the lifelong effects that rape has on an individual, while encouraging others to be able to reclaim a full life after surviving such trauma. And the third was to reclaim a full life for myself and to be an emotionally present mother and wife, and to actually live instead of just floating through time, numb. What's your wishbone? In your story, what's your what now instead of why me? Or what can it be? My wishbone has taken time to grow and develop, and it's taken many forms over the last several years. In challenging the notion of gun-free zones, I have found myself before several judiciary committees across the country, pleading with lawmakers to allow campus carry on our universities. The question of my life is and will remain to be what would have been different if I had been carrying my firearm that night. It continues to keep me up at night as I replay those 8 minutes over and over. It's the same end result. I would have been able to stop my attack as it was in progress, and consequently, 2 other rapes would have been prevented, and 3 lives would have been saved. In my quest to ensure that no other person will have to endure the same horror that I have often been told, your case is just so rare. As I'm talking to you today, I would like for you to consider that most rapes still go unreported, as did mine initially. And while I'm talking about one incident involving 2 rapes, or involving 2 other cases, we have no way of knowing exactly how many assaults occur on our university campuses. What we do know is reportedly 1 in 4 women will be raped while attending a college. And 1/3 of them will be on the campus that they are attending. A study from the Journal of Interpersonal Violence found 126 admitted perpetrators had committed 907 sexual assaults. 126 perpetrators had committed 907 sexual assaults, involving 882 victims. Well, I did the math, and that's an average of 7 victims per perpetrator who's serving any amount of time for 1. So with this information, I can confidently say my case isn't rare. What's rare about my case is that I'm openly talking about it. And what's even more rare is that my rapist is on death row, because the majority of these cases go unprosecuted. I've been assured as well, you could have just been so much worse off if you had been carrying your firearm. We really are looking out for your safety. Let's roll with that for a second. I was being raped at gunpoint. How much worse off could I have been? This has led me to the second part of my wishbone. Seen collectively as a society, our culture does not understand what rape really is. Soul murder. My soul was murdered that night. Not a single layer of my being was left unscathed. And I have to believe that it's because we just don't understand what that crime actually does. And so, as I'm standing in front of you, remember every 90 seconds, someone in this country is being raped. And less than 20% are reported. Why? Maybe because 4 short years after Roe v. Wade was passed, in 1977, the Supreme Court ruled in Coker v. Georgia that the sentence of death for the crime of rape was grossly disproportionate and excessive punishment, and is therefore forbidden by the 8th Amendment as cruel and unusual punishment, because the rapist, and I quote, does not take a life. Yet every time the argument for maintaining Roe v. Wade comes up, the first argument I always hear is, what if a woman gets raped? For as long as I can remember, women's choices have been the fixation target during every election term. though it's always around reproductive rights. And rarely is it ever around the right for women to choose how they want to protect themselves. If we as a society really cared about women being raped, then the first thing we would do is overturn Georgia v. Coker. If the goal was truly keeping the government from overreaching and keeping lawmakers outside of our bodies, we would be able to do whatever we could to equip women with the ability to prevent being raped. Instead, every semester across the nation, students are given pamphlets about how to prevent sexual assault, with the suggestions like making ourselves less desirable to our attacker by vomiting, urinating, crying, or telling them we have a sexually transmitted disease. Proving there is a lack of understanding that rape is about violence and control and is using sex as that vehicle. It has very little to do with sex and everything to do with violence and control over another human being. Somehow owning a firearm and wanting to effectively defend myself is what's undignified. It'd be better for me to retreat as much as I can and call for help as I wait for government officials to arrive with their guns to offer help, leaving me defensively harmless as I'm first in line to my defense. Others have suggested call boxes. The response time is 12 minutes if the call box works. My rape lasted 8 minutes. The choice to participate in one's self-defense should be left to the individual. And that individual choice should not be mandated by the government. And we as law-abiding citizens shouldn't have to hand over our ability and to protect ourselves to a third party. The legislators in Nevada continue to effectively legislate women into victims by stripping away our Second Amendment right, because they're seemingly more intimidated by law-abiding citizens like me sitting in class with our permitted firearm than they are of the rapist waiting for us in the parking garage. Again, guns are what is more offensive because they represent only violence. And I'd like to remind you, I cannot be peaceful unless I am capable of great violence. As first in line to my defense, my children's defense, if I'm not capable of matching that act of violence that is coming against me, I'm not peaceful. I'm harmless. The lawmakers know it, and the criminal knows it. There was nothing in place that night from keeping my attacker coming onto that campus. And there's nothing in place right now from keeping the next attacker coming on to campus. During his sentencing, my attacker was given a 1-year enhancement charge for having a firearm where he shouldn't have had it. 1 year. You could argue, and it has been presented to me, what more would I have wanted? He is serving 4 consecutive life sentences and the death penalty. It sets a precedent. As a law-abiding citizen, I had more to lose that night if I was carrying my firearm and if I wasn't carrying my firearm. Had I been carrying my firearm, I would have potentially faced expulsion from school, a federal charge, loss of ever being able to have my concealed carry permit. Do you think I would have gotten a teaching job with that? No. But he was given a 1-year enhancement charge? I will keep persisting and asking the same question to legislators until I get a satisfactory answer. How does rendering me defenseless protect you against a violent crime? You're first in line too. This is an issue that continues to remain real and present, as I shared with you earlier. I wasn't first in line just on my university campus. I'm still first in line. And I'm still charged with keeping my children safe. My oldest daughter is 13 years old. In 5 short, sweet years, she's going to be first in line when I send her off to college. And I want her to be able to choose how she wants to actively participate in her own self-defense. I never thought that seeking after the Second Amendment rights on college campuses would lead me to wanting to equip and empower other survivors to be able to reclaim a full life. Yet every time I share my story, women always come up to me and share their story with me. And they would always ask, how are you doing it? How are you living a full life? And this was before I was even talking about it. And so I had to eventually learn. It ignited a fire within me to be able to lead these women with me back to the land of the living. And while I'm still on that lifelong journey, that's why I wrote and published Beyond Survival, to serve as a guide to other survivors and to give insight to loved ones and to anyone who works with them to be able to know how to lovingly and effectively walk alongside us as we continue to be first in line. Thank you so much for having me.
What an honest talk. I get emotional just listening to her. Are we all going to go to the range and start a practice? Okay? And then fight for concealed carry on campuses and every place else. There's no safe zones, are there? There's no gun safe zones. All right. We have a microphone here for questions. Yes, Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind giving your name, your affiliation, because we want the people on C-SPAN to hear your question.
Elena Melkert. I did not have the privilege of growing up in a culture like yours where there was this attentiveness to safety. So how does someone, at this state in life, kind of approach, consider?
Education is power. And so there are a lot of resources that I'd be happy to get you in touch with. There's a lot of women's organizations as well. And I think doing your research to know, for one, what the current laws are, and then going to the range and doing things with people who are safe and who are also responsible, and just get out there and get going. It may be uncomfortable, but hard things are often worth it.
Hi, I'm Patty Menders. I actually work for our Virginia Attorney General, and I would love to know, have you been successful in any state with legislation, removing some of these gun zones on colleges?
In Colorado, I was instrumental in helping preserve the right to maintain concealed carry, and then I've written a lot of letters. I wouldn't say that it's always a community effort. It's always a force. It's never one person, but I have certainly been able to write letters and get things passed in several other states, and to encourage people who are in their own states to be able to go before their legislators to get it passed. Nevada's still a gun-free zone, though. Oh, I know. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us a little bit about the attacker? What you gleaned from the case and a little bit about him?
A little bit about the attacker in what form or fashion?
I mean, was he an illegal alien? Was he married? Was he another student? Was he?
Okay. So that is covered a bit in my book, but I have no problem sharing. He was not a legal alien. He was a construction worker at the time. The university was doing a lot of add-ons, and so he was a pipe fitter. He was on the university campus often. It is surmised that he knew my habits and he knew how to get me based on my attack and the other attacks that ensued. He was rather methodical with what he did. He clearly escalated. He had a longtime girlfriend and a 2-year-old son at the time. Reno is known as the biggest, littlest city in the world, and there's only a few degrees of separation. And so I have actually encountered a handful of people who knew him in their daily lives, and they were shocked to know that he was the one who was responsible for this. It was also surmised during trial that the reason he did not kill me was because he was unaware that I would able to identify him to the extent that I was able to.
And how did you later do that? Did they draw pictures of him?
I worked with a sketch artist. And that sketch eventually is what helped lead to his arrest. Yes, ma'am.
Are there colleges and universities in states that will allow?
Yes, ma'am. There are. Mom brain is hitting me very hard at the current moment to remember exactly which ones.
Okay.
For a lot of states, though, however, it's not a blanket allowance. They say that it is at the discretion of each individual university. So the legislators pass it, but then they pass it off to the universities to be able to decide. And more often than not, even though the state allows it, the individual universities and the privatized universities will say no and not allow it. I do know that Utah does allow it. Colorado does allow it. Off the top of my head, I think Minnesota, and I believe there's about 10 or 11 states now is the last statistic that I saw that does allow it.
Every now and then I read an article that says a student goes back to their car because they have a gun in their trunk of the car.
Correct.
And saves students
Sure.
from shooters. But
Sure. So that depends on how the individual law is written. At the University of Nevada, in the state of Nevada, that was not an option for me to have my firearm in the vehicle because even bringing it on campus at all was completely illegal. There are other states who will allow students to lock their firearm up securely in their vehicle, and that's why it's really important to go through and read what the law actually is and not just the headline.
So our Attorney General's office, we have a victims first mentality. We are working with law enforcement to train them with our trauma-induced training, and I've done it many times. And I just wanted to end on a positive because we are really focused on victims first in Virginia, especially with the AG. So I know a lot of victims do not come forward. And your statistic is dead on. They feel a sense of shame, and they don't want to share it with anyone. So I know a gentleman in high school who this happened to him in the bathroom of the library, and he didn't tell anyone. So I know this happens to all kinds, but I just wanted to let you know that our administration is working hard to have a victims first mentality and retrain law enforcement to believe you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I could just ask the last one, and then we'll talk informally over lunch. It's not positive, sorry. A young woman like you were, who's leaving class at night and has to endure what you did.
Mhm.
Give me the top 3 things you would tell her as soon as she shared with you what had happened.
I believe you. Thank you for trusting me with your story. And no matter the circumstances, no matter what you were wearing, no matter where you were, it is not your fault. It's not your fault. It's his fault, your attacker's fault. It was their poor choices. Those are the top 3 things that I would say.
Some gifts for you here.
Oh.
What a great talk. Thank you so much. We have some gifts for you. This one is very appropriate. This is our limited edition Clare Boothe Luce Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women coffee mug. What was her famous quote?
Courage is the ladder on which all other virtues mounts.
Courage,
I love
right here.
Thank you.
And I want to give you a copy of my book, How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. You are raising wonderful ones. You probably could have written this already, but I want you to have
No, I'll
this.
take all wisdom.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your
Thank
talk.
you.
Thank you all for coming, and now we can have lunch and book signing outside.
Great.
Oh, wow.